The dust-laden wind swept through the main street of Salida, Colorado, as Bethany Wilson clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest, her skirts swirling around her ankles as she descended from the stagecoach. The journey had left her exhausted, but there was no time for rest, not when she was running from a past that seemed determined to catch up with her. Salida in 1878 was a town caught between its mining camp origins and aspirations of civilization. Wooden boardwalks lined the street, fronting an assortment of establishments: a general store, a saloon with piano music spilling from its swinging doors, and the imposing two-story structure that housed both the sheriff's office and the jail. The town sat nestled in the Arkansas River Valley, surrounded by towering mountain peaks that seemed to touch the endless Colorado sky. Bethany's auburn hair had come loose from its pins during the bumpy journey, and she hastily tucked the wayward strands behind her ears as she surveyed her surroundings. At 26, she had learned that first impressions meant everything, especially for a woman traveling alone. Her green eyes, which once sparkled with youthful innocence, now held the wariness of someone who had seen too much of life's harsher realities. "First time in Salida, miss?" The stagecoach driver handed down her single trunk. "Yes," she replied, forcing a smile. "Is there a boarding house nearby?" The driver pointed down the street. "Mrs. Holloway's place, 2 blocks down. Tell her Bert sent you." Bethany nodded her thanks and began making her way down the street, conscious of the curious glances from the townsfolk going about their business. A woman traveling alone was still something of an oddity in these parts, especially one dressed in clothes that, while dusty from travel, were clearly of fine quality. She had nearly reached the boarding house when a commotion from the saloon caught her attention. The batwing doors burst open, and a man stumbled out, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. "That's the 3rd time this week, Dawson," a voice bellowed from inside. "Pay for the damages or don't come back." The man called Dawson straightened his hat and dusted off his vest with exaggerated dignity. "That glass was cracked before I even touched it, Pete, and you know it." Bethany couldn't help but smile at the scene, the first genuine smile that had crossed her lips in weeks. The man noticed her watching and tipped his hat with a roguish grin that made her cheeks flush despite herself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and a face that, while ruggedly handsome, showed signs of having seen its share of both laughter and hardship. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone. "Welcome to Salida. Don't let the local entertainment discourage you. We're actually quite civilized most days." "I'll reserve judgment," she replied, unable to keep a hint of amusement from her voice. He laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Dawson Caldwell," he introduced himself with another tip of his hat. "Town troublemaker, according to some, though I prefer free spirit." "Bethany Wilson," she returned, offering a slight nod instead of her hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Caldwell." "The pleasure's mine, Miss Wilson." His blue eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "If you're new in town, I'd be happy to. Is there a problem here, Caldwell?" A stern voice interrupted. Bethany turned to see a man approaching, the silver star pinned to his vest identifying him as the local sheriff. He was older than Dawson by perhaps 15 years, with graying hair at his temples and a weathered face that suggested he had little patience for nonsense. "No problem, Sheriff Hargrove," Dawson replied, his tone remaining light, though Bethany noticed his posture stiffened slightly. "Just welcoming Miss Wilson to our fair town." Sheriff Hargrove's assessing gaze moved to Bethany, his expression unreadable. "Miss," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I trust you're just passing through." The question struck Bethany as odd, but she maintained her composure. "Actually, I was hoping to stay for a while. I'm on my way to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house now. I see. Something in the sheriff's tone made Bethany's skin prickle with unease. Well, don't let me keep you. As she continued toward the boarding house, she could feel the sheriff's eyes on her back, and she heard him say quietly to Dawson, "Stay out of trouble, Caldwell. You're on thin ice as it is." Mrs. Holloway's boarding house proved to be a tidy two-story structure with white lace curtains in the windows and a small sign hanging by the door. The proprietress herself, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair, greeted Bethany warmly. "A room for a single lady." "Of course, dear. How long will you be staying?" "I'm not certain yet," Bethany replied, fishing in her reticule for payment. "A week to start, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable. It's the second room at the top of the stairs." "Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6, and no gentlemen callers after 8. Mrs. Holloway smiled as she handed over a key. "And what brings you to Salida, if you don't mind my asking? We don't get many unaccompanied young ladies." Bethany had prepared for this question. "I'm a teacher." "I heard the school in Salida might be looking for someone." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been a teacher back in Boston before everything had fallen apart, and she had heard that frontier towns were often desperate for educators. Mrs. Holloway's face lit up. "Oh, indeed they are. The last teacher left 3 months ago to get married. The school board has been desperate to find a replacement before the new term. You should speak with Mr. Abernathy at the general store. He's on the school board." Bethany thanked her and made her way upstairs to her room. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a window overlooking the street. She set down her satchel and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to exhale. She had made it. Salida was far enough from Boston that no one would know her here, far enough from the scandal that had destroyed her reputation and left her with no choice but to flee. Here, she could be just Miss Wilson, the new schoolteacher. No one needed to know about Charles Bennett, the married banker who had pursued her relentlessly, promising to leave his wife, only to deny everything when their affair was discovered. No one needed to know how his influential family had ensured that she, not he, bore the full brunt of public censure. Bethany unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her mother's silver-backed hairbrush on the washstand. The journey had been long and exhausting, but there was no time to waste if she wanted to secure the teaching position. She freshened up, changed into her best blue dress, and pinned her hair neatly before heading back downstairs. The general store was bustling with activity when she arrived. Behind the counter stood a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, carefully weighing flour for a customer. Bethany waited patiently until he was free before approaching. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm Bethany Wilson. Mrs. Holloway suggested I speak with you about the teaching position." The storekeeper looked up in surprise, his face breaking into a smile. "A teacher? Well, now that is welcome news. Let me close up for lunch and we can discuss it properly." Within 15 minutes, Bethany found herself seated in Mr. Abernathy's back office, explaining her qualifications. She had brought her teaching credentials with her, one of the few things she hadn't left behind in her hasty departure from Boston. 5 years at the Hawthorne Academy for Young Ladies. "Impressive," Mr. Abernathy nodded as he examined her papers. "And you taught literature, mathematics, and natural sciences." "Yes, and music as well. I play the piano," Bethany added. "Wonderful, wonderful. The school here is much more modest, of course. Just one room, about 20 children of various ages. The pay is $30 a month. With lodging included, there's a small cottage behind the schoolhouse." It was less than half what she had earned at Hawthorne, but Bethany didn't hesitate. "That sounds perfect." "Excellent. The school board meets tomorrow evening. Normally, we'd require more references, but with your credentials and our desperate situation. He hesitated. There is the matter of why you left your previous position. Bethany had prepared for this too. My mother passed away recently. I felt I needed a change of scenery, somewhere I could make a difference. Again, not entirely untrue. Her mother had died 2 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. Mr. Abernathy nodded sympathetically. I understand completely. Well, I see no reason why the board won't approve your appointment immediately. Term starts in 2 weeks, which should give you time to settle in and prepare. Bethany left the general store feeling lighter than she had in months. A fresh start, that was all she needed. She decided to walk around the town to familiarize herself with her new home. Salida was larger than she had initially thought. Besides the main street with its businesses, there were several residential streets lined with a mix of modest frame houses and more substantial brick homes. The schoolhouse was a simple white building with a small bell tower, and behind it stood the teacher's cottage, tiny but charming, with a small garden plot. As she was admiring it from the outside, a voice spoke from behind her, planning to plant roses or vegetables. She turned to find Dawson Caldwell leading a magnificent chestnut horse by the reins. In the daylight, away from the saloon, he cut an even more impressive figure. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: denim pants, a blue cotton shirt, a leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he was more than just a hired hand. I hadn't thought that far ahead, Bethany admitted. Though I've never had much luck with plants. Vegetables, then, he advised with a grin. They're more forgiving and you can eat your mistakes. She laughed despite herself. You seem very certain I'll be living here. Word travels fast in Salida, Mrs. Holloway told Mrs. Peterson, who told her husband, who mentioned it to me when I stopped by the livery. He shrugged. By supper, everyone will know that Miss Bethany Wilson from Boston is our new school teacher. The mention of Boston made her stomach tighten. I see news travels with remarkable efficiency. It's both the charm and the curse of small towns. Dawson patted his horse's neck. This is Thunder, by the way, best cow horse in the county. The horse nickered softly as if agreeing with his assessment. He's beautiful, Bethany said, reaching out hesitantly to stroke the animal's velvety nose. He knows it too. Vainest creature I've ever met. Dawson's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I was just heading out to check on some strays. The Caldwell Ranch is about 3 miles south of town. You're a rancher, among other things. My father started the ranch, but I find myself dividing my time between cattle and other interests. Like being the town troublemaker, Bethany suggested, recalling his earlier introduction. He laughed again. That's more of a hobby than an occupation. His expression grew more serious. Listen, Miss Wilson, a word of advice from someone who knows this town well. Sheriff Hargrove can be particular about newcomers. Don't take it personally. Before she could ask what he meant, the church bell rang out the hour. I should get back, she said, suddenly aware that they had been talking in public where anyone could see. A new school teacher couldn't afford to spark gossip before she'd even started the job. Of course. I'm sure our paths will cross again, Miss Wilson. He tipped his hat and mounted his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Welcome to Salida. Bethany watched him ride away, puzzling over his warning about the sheriff. What had he meant about Hargrove being particular about newcomers? She shook off her unease and headed back toward the boarding house. As she walked down the main street, she noticed Sheriff Hargrove standing outside his office, watching her approach with that same inscrutable expression from earlier. Deciding that directness was the best approach, she stopped in front of him. "Good afternoon, Sheriff. I've accepted the teaching position at the school. It seems I'll be becoming a permanent resident of your town." Hargrove's face remained impassive. "Is that so? Interesting how quickly that came about." He studied her for a moment. "Where did you say you were from again, Miss Wilson?" "Boston," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Long way to travel for a teaching job in a small mining town. I wanted a change of scenery. Most people do when they're running from something." The statement hung in the air between them. "Just so we understand each other, Miss Wilson, I keep close watch on my town. I don't take kindly to trouble." Bethany felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "I assure you, Sheriff, I have no intention of causing any trouble." "Good. See that you don't." With that, he turned and went back into his office, leaving Bethany standing on the boardwalk, her heart pounding in her chest. That evening, as she sat in Mrs. Holloway's dining room with the other boarders, an elderly accountant, a young clerk from the bank, and a widow who worked at the millinery shop, Bethany tried to focus on their conversation, but her mind kept returning to the sheriff's veiled warning. "Don't mind Hargrove, Mrs. Holloway said quietly as she refilled Bethany's coffee cup, having noticed her preoccupation. "He's been like that since his wife died 5 years ago. Takes his job very seriously, too seriously if you ask me." "Has he always been the sheriff?" "Oh no, he came here about 7 years ago. No one knows much about his past, but he cleaned up the town when we were having trouble with outlaws, so folks elected him sheriff, and he's held the position ever since." The information didn't reassure Bethany as much as Mrs. Holloway probably intended. A man with a mysterious past who scrutinized newcomers. What if he somehow discovered hers? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The school board unanimously approved her appointment, and Bethany moved into the teacher's cottage, which, though sparsely furnished, quickly began to feel like home. She spent her days preparing lessons, organizing the schoolroom, and meeting the families of her future pupils, who welcomed her with cautious optimism. She saw Dawson Caldwell occasionally in town, and each time he greeted her warmly, sometimes stopping to chat about her preparations for the school term or to share some local gossip. She learned that his ranch was one of the largest in the area, and that, besides raising cattle, he had interests in a silver mine up in the mountains. Despite his apparent prosperity, he seemed to prefer the simple life of a cowboy to that of a wealthy businessman. "My father always said a man should work with his hands," he told her one afternoon as they stood outside the general store. "Said it keeps you honest. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." A shadow crossed Dawson's face. "He died 3 years ago. Pneumonia took him after he got caught in a blizzard bringing strays down from the high country." "I'm sorry," Bethany said softly. "I lost my mother 2 years ago. It leaves a hole that never quite fills, doesn't it?" Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding, and Bethany felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer sun. The day before school was to begin, Bethany was returning from a final meeting with Mr. Abernathy when she noticed unusual activity outside the sheriff's office. A man she didn't recognize was tying his horse to the hitching post, a tall, expensively dressed individual with a neat beard and a citified look about him. As she drew closer, he turned, and Bethany froze in her tracks. It couldn't be. But there was no mistaking those cold eyes, that superior tilt of the chin. Edward Bennett, Charles's elder brother, the man who had orchestrated her public humiliation in Boston. Her first instinct was to flee, but it was too late. He had seen her. A smile of malicious triumph spread across his face. "Miss Wilson," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet street, What an extraordinary coincidence, or perhaps not so extraordinary after all. Bethany's throat went dry. Mr. Bennett, what brings you to Salida? Business interests, initially. But when I heard rumors of a new schoolteacher from Boston, I became curious. He adjusted his gloves with deliberate precision. Imagine my surprise to discover it was you, of all people. People were beginning to take notice of their conversation. Bethany saw Mrs. Peterson from the bakery watching with undisguised interest. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Bennett, I have preparations to complete for tomorrow." She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. "Always in such a hurry to avoid unpleasantness," he said. "Just like when you fled Boston rather than face the consequences of your actions." "My actions." Bethany's fear began to give way to anger. "Your brother pursued me relentlessly. He lied to me, told me he was separated from his wife, a convenient tale. Not one his wife believed, I assure you." Bennett's voice had hardened. "You destroyed a family, Miss Wilson. Did you think you could simply disappear and start fresh as if nothing had happened?" Before Bethany could respond, another voice cut through their confrontation. "Is there a problem here?" Dawson Caldwell appeared at her side, his normally good-humored expression replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "This is a private conversation," Bennett said dismissively. "Not anymore, it isn't," Dawson replied. He turned to Bethany. "Miss Wilson, are you being bothered?" She hesitated, torn between her desire to flee and her determination not to let Edward Bennett intimidate her again. "Mr. Bennett and I were just concluding our discussion." Bennett laughed, an unpleasant sound. "We've barely begun, I assure you." Sheriff Hargrove will be most interested to learn about the true character of Salida's new schoolteacher. Dawson's hand moved to rest casually near his holstered revolver. "I suggest you reconsider that. Miss Wilson is a respected member of this community." "Is she? For how long, I wonder?" "A woman who seduces married men. That's a lie," Bethany cut in, her voice shaking with fury. "Your brother was the liar, the manipulator. He used his position and power to what? Force you into his bed? I think not." Dawson moved so quickly that Bennett barely had time to register the movement before he found himself pinned against the wall of the sheriff's office. Dawson's forearm pressed against his throat. "That's no way to speak to a lady," Dawson said, his voice deceptively calm. "I think you owe Miss Wilson an apology." "Take your hands off me, you uncouth savage," Bennett sputtered. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Don't know, don't care," Dawson replied. "All I know is you're harassing a lady in my town, and that doesn't sit well with me." The door to the sheriff's office swung open and Hargrove emerged, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. "What's going on here, Caldwell?" Dawson released Bennett, who straightened his jacket with exaggerated dignity. "This cowboy assaulted me without provocation, Sheriff." "Is that right?" Hargrove's gaze moved from Bennett to Dawson to Bethany. "And what's your part in this, Miss Wilson?" Before Bethany could respond, Bennett spoke again. "Sheriff, this woman is not what she claims to be. In Boston, she was at the center of a scandal involving my brother, a respectable married banker. She seduced him, tried to trap him." "That's not true," Bethany interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Your brother pursued me for months. He told me he was separated from his wife, that they were divorcing quietly. I discovered the truth too late, and when I tried to end things, he threatened to ruin my career if I left him." "A fabrication," Bennett snapped. "When the affair was discovered, she fled Boston rather than face the consequences of her actions." Sheriff Hargrove's expression remained unreadable as he listened to both sides. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Bennett, I understand you're passing through on business." "Yes, I have investments in several silver mines in the region." Then I suggest you attend to those investments and leave personal matters behind you. We don't need Boston scandals imported to Salida." Bennett looked stunned. "Surely you're not taking her side." "This woman is a disgrace. I'm not taking anyone's side," Hargrove cut him off. "I'm keeping the peace in my town. Now I suggest you all disperse before this draws any more attention." Bennett glared at them all before storming off toward the hotel. Hargrove turned his attention to Dawson. "Caldwell, I've warned you about causing trouble." "He was harassing Miss Wilson," Dawson said unapologetically. "That may be, but we handle things through proper channels in this town." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Bethany, his expression hardening. "Miss Wilson, a word in private if you please." The sheriff's office was sparsely furnished: a desk, a few chairs, a gun rack, and a pot-bellied stove that stood cold in the summer heat. Wanted posters adorned one wall, and a barred door led to the cells in the back. "Sit down," Hargrove said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. He remained standing, looking down at her with those penetrating eyes. "I knew you were hiding something from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. People don't come to places like Salida unless they're looking for something or running from something." Bethany sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "What happened in Boston?" "I don't care what happened in Boston," Hargrove interrupted. "What I care about is my town. Salida's growing. We've got families moving in, businesses establishing themselves. The last thing we need is scandal and division. I assure you, Sheriff, I have no intention of— Intentions don't count for much, Miss Wilson. Results do." He leaned against his desk, his expression severe. "I've seen what happens when personal feuds spill over into public life. It tears communities apart." "This isn't a feud," Bethany insisted. "Mr. Bennett's brother deceived me, then his family used their influence to destroy my reputation when the truth came out. I came here for a fresh start, nothing more. And yet trouble followed you." Hargrove sighed heavily. "The school board appointed you in good faith. The children are expecting you tomorrow, but Bennett's accusations are serious." "They're also false," Bethany said firmly. "Perhaps, but perception matters in a small town, especially for someone in your position. Teachers are held to a higher standard." He straightened up, his decision apparently made. "I think it would be best for everyone if you left Salida. Before the rumors start, before sides are taken." Bethany stared at him in disbelief. "You're asking me to leave?" "After I've prepared the school, met the families, moved into the cottage. I'm not asking, Miss Wilson." His voice was implacable. "I'm telling you. For the good of this town, you need to be gone by sundown tomorrow." "That's not fair. You haven't even heard my side of the story properly." "I've heard enough. Edward Bennett is a wealthy, influential man with business interests that benefit Salida. Your word against his isn't going to count for much with the town council. So that's it. I'm to be run out of town based on the word of a vindictive man I barely know. You'll be compensated for your time, of course. Mr. Abernathy will see to that." Hargrove's tone made it clear that the discussion was over. "The eastbound stage leaves at 4 tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you be on it." Bethany rose from her chair, trembling with a mixture of shock, anger, and despair. "This isn't justice, Sheriff. Justice is a luxury, Miss Wilson. Order is a necessity." He opened the door, signaling that their meeting was concluded. "By sundown tomorrow." Bethany left the sheriff's office with her head high, refusing to give anyone watching the satisfaction of seeing her distress. But once inside her cottage, she collapsed onto a chair, finally allowing the tears to come. Everything she had worked for, the fresh start she had so desperately needed, all of it snatched away in an instant by Edward Bennett's vindictiveness and Sheriff Hargrove's arbitrary decree. She was still sitting there, staring blankly at the wall when a knock came at her door an hour later. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but then she rose, wiped her eyes, and answered. Dawson Caldwell stood on her porch, hat in hand, concern etched on his features. "Miss Wilson, I heard what happened. The sheriff's decision, it's not right." "It doesn't seem to matter whether it's right or not," she replied bitterly. "Apparently, Mr. Bennett's business interests outweigh simple justice. May I come in? Just for a moment," he added quickly, sensitive to the proprieties. Bethany hesitated, then stepped aside. Under normal circumstances, inviting a man into her home alone would be scandalous, but what did it matter now? Her reputation in Salida was already being dismantled. "The sheriff doesn't speak for everyone in this town," Dawson said once they were seated at her small kitchen table. "There are plenty of people who would stand by you if they knew the truth." "What truth?" "That I was naive enough to believe a married man's lies. That I fled Boston in disgrace rather than face the consequences. Even if that's not the whole story, it's enough to ruin me here." She shook her head. "Perhaps the sheriff is right. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if I just left." "And go where? Start over again somewhere else, always looking over your shoulder for the next Edward Bennett to appear." Dawson leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "You can't keep running, Bethany." It was the first time he had used her given name, and somehow that small intimacy broke through her despair. "What choice do I have? Stay and fight. Tell your side of the story. The people here are fair-minded, whatever the sheriff thinks. He's given me until sundown tomorrow to leave." Dawson's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have to change his mind." "How? You heard him. Bennett is influential and I'm just—" She trailed off, gesturing helplessly. "You're the woman this town needs as its teacher," Dawson finished for her. "And I'm not letting Hargrove or Bennett or anyone else drive you away." He stood up, determination written in every line of his body. "Stay here. I'll be back." Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving Bethany to wonder what he could possibly do against the combined opposition of the sheriff and a wealthy businessman like Edward Bennett. It was nearly dusk when Dawson returned, accompanied by Mr. Abernathy and Mrs. Holloway. Their expressions were grim but resolute. "We've been to see Sheriff Hargrove," Mr. Abernathy explained, "to inform him that his decision is not supported by the school board or the town council." "He was most unreasonable," Mrs. Holloway added. "Insisted that your presence would cause division and scandal." "And I told him," Dawson said, "that if you were forced to leave, I would go too and take my business elsewhere." Bethany stared at him in shock. "You can't do that." "Your ranch, your mine, can be managed from Denver or Colorado Springs just as easily as from here," he replied firmly. "I won't stay in a town that allows injustice to prevail." "Nor will many others," Mr. Abernathy said. "Dawson isn't the only one who feels this way." Half the town council was ready to call a special meeting to overturn the sheriff's decree. "But he's the law here," Bethany protested. "Doesn't his word carry weight?" "The law, yes, but not the final authority on who can live in Salida," Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "That would be quite the overreach of his powers." "The problem," Mr. Abernathy continued, "is that Hargrove is stubborn, and he has support from some of the more conservative elements in town. And Bennett has been busy spreading his version of events to anyone who will listen." "So we're at an impasse," Bethany concluded, her brief flare of hope fading. "Not quite," Dawson said. "There's going to be a town meeting tomorrow at noon. Everyone will have a chance to speak, including you. The people of Salida can decide for themselves who they believe." The thought of standing before the entire town, recounting the most painful and humiliating chapter of her life, made Bethany's stomach churn. "I don't know if I can do that." "You can," Dawson insisted, taking her hand. The warmth of his touch sent an unexpected flutter through her. "You're stronger than you realize, Bethany. I've seen it from the first day we met. His faith in her, so unwavering and complete, kindled something in her chest, a determination that had been buried beneath layers of shame and fear. "All right," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'll tell my story. Whatever happens after that, at least I'll know I stood my ground." The town hall was filled to capacity the next day at noon. Every resident of Salida who could possibly attend was there, from the wealthiest mine owner to the laborers who worked the rail yard. Bethany sat in the front row, aware of the whispers and stares directed her way. Dawson sat beside her, a solid presence that gave her courage. Sheriff Hargrove stood on the small stage at the front, his expression stony. Edward Bennett was there too, looking smugly confident as though the outcome was already decided in his favor. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, called the meeting to order. "Citizens of Salida, we are gathered to address a matter of community concern. Sheriff Hargrove has ordered Miss Bethany Wilson to leave town by sundown today. This decision has been challenged by Mr. Dawson Caldwell and several members of the town council. Before we proceed to a vote, we will hear from all parties involved." Sheriff Hargrove spoke first, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "My duty is to maintain order and protect this town's reputation. Miss Wilson arrives under mysterious circumstances, and now we learn she was involved in a scandal in Boston, a scandal serious enough that she fled rather than face its consequences. As our school teacher, she would be responsible for molding the character of our children. Can we entrust them to someone whose own character is questionable?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bethany felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her head high. Edward Bennett spoke next, his cultured voice dripping with affected concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, it pains me to be the bearer of such news, but as a man of business and a Christian, I cannot in good conscience remain silent. Miss Wilson engaged in an illicit affair with my brother, a married man with 3 young children. When discovered, rather than expressing remorse, she attempted to extort money from my family in exchange for her silence. When that failed, she disappeared only to resurface here, presenting herself as a woman of virtue qualified to teach your children." The murmurs grew louder, and Bethany could see doubt and disapproval on many faces. Her hands trembled in her lap, and she felt sick with dread. Then it was Dawson's turn. He stood tall and straight, his voice steady and clear. "I haven't known Miss Wilson long, but I know honesty when I see it, and courage too. She came to Salida seeking nothing but a fresh start and a chance to use her considerable skills to benefit our community. In the short time she's been here, she's won the respect of the school board, prepared diligently for the term, and shown nothing but dedication to her calling." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I've lived in Salida most of my life. My father helped build this town. He taught me that we judge people by their actions, not by rumors or accusations. Miss Wilson's actions since arriving here have been beyond reproach. If we allow her to be driven away based on one man's claims, what does that say about us? What kind of community are we building?" His words seemed to resonate with many in the crowd, but others remained skeptical. Finally, Mayor Thompson turned to Bethany. "Miss Wilson, would you like to address these accusations?" The walk to the stage felt impossibly long. Bethany's legs threatened to give way beneath her, but somehow she made it, turning to face the sea of faces, some hostile, some sympathetic, most simply curious. She took a deep breath and began to speak. 3 years ago, I was teaching at the Hawthorne Academy in Boston when I met Charles Bennett. He was a trustee of the school, a respected banker, and, I thought, a gentleman. He told me he was separated from his wife, that they remained married only for the sake of appearances while divorce proceedings were being quietly arranged. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, the words pouring out after being bottled up for so long. I believed him. For months, we met in secret, always with the understanding that once his divorce was final, we would marry. It was only when I encountered his wife at a social function, speaking of their plans for a summer vacation together, that I realized I had been deceived. She looked directly at Edward Bennett, refusing to be intimidated by his glare. When I confronted Charles, he admitted the truth but begged me not to end our relationship. When I insisted, he threatened to have me dismissed from my position, to ruin my reputation so thoroughly that I would never teach again. I didn't believe he could do such a thing until he did. Bethany described how Charles had claimed she had attempted to blackmail him, how the Bennett family's influence had ensured that her denials went unheard, how she had been publicly humiliated and privately threatened until she saw no choice but to leave Boston altogether. I came to Salida because I heard it was a place where people could start fresh, where they were judged on their merits rather than their past. All I want is a chance to teach, to use the skills I've spent years developing, to be of service to this community. Her voice broke slightly. If you decide I must leave, I will go. But please know that whatever you may have heard about me, I have never sought to harm anyone. I was guilty of trusting too easily, of believing a skilled liar, but not of the things Mr. Bennett has accused me of. Silence fell over the hall as she returned to her seat. Dawson reached for her hand, squeezing it reassuringly, and she found herself drawing strength from his touch. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. We have heard from all parties. Before we proceed to a vote, does anyone else wish to speak? To Bethany's surprise, Mrs. Holloway stood up. I've had Miss Wilson staying at my boarding house since she arrived. In that time, I've observed a young woman of impeccable conduct and gentle character. I don't know what happened in Boston, but I know what I've seen with my own eyes, and I would be proud to have Miss Wilson teach my grandchildren. Others spoke up as well. Mr. Abernathy, the minister's wife who had met Bethany at a church social, even some of the parents whose children would be in her class. Their support brought tears to her eyes. When everyone had spoken, Mayor Thompson called for a vote. Those in favor of allowing Miss Wilson to remain in Salida and assume her duties as schoolteacher, please stand. Dawson was on his feet instantly, followed by Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Abernathy, and gradually, more and more people until at least 2/3 of the hall was standing. Bethany's heart swelled at the sight. Those opposed, Sheriff Hargrove stood, along with Edward Bennett and perhaps 20 others, mostly older, more conservative members of the community who regarded Bethany with disapproving frowns. The majority has spoken, Mayor Thompson announced. Miss Wilson will remain as Salida's schoolteacher. A cheer went up from Dawson and his supporters, but Sheriff Hargrove was not finished. He strode to the center of the hall, his face dark with anger. This isn't over, he declared. As sheriff, I have a duty to protect this town, and I say this woman is a danger to our moral fabric. I will not stand by and watch as she corrupts our youth with her Eastern ways and questionable values. That's enough, Hargrove, Dawson said, stepping forward to confront him. The people have decided. Accept it gracefully or not at all, but accept it you will. Or what, Caldwell? You'll force me. With what authority? With the authority of someone who truly cares about this town and its people, all of its people, not just the ones who conform to your narrow view of what's right. The two men stood face to face, tension crackling between them. For a terrible moment, Bethany feared violence would erupt. Then, unexpectedly, Edward Bennett pushed his way between them. This is absurd, he spat. If this backwater town is willing to embrace a woman like her, then it's not a place where decent people should do business. Sheriff, I'm withdrawing my investments from the region. Good day." He stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Sheriff Hargrove looked around at the assembled townspeople, many of whom were now regarding him with disappointment or outright disapproval. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "All of you." He turned to Bethany, his expression cold. "You may have won them over for now, Miss Wilson, but I'll be watching you. One misstep, one hint of impropriety, and you'll find yourself facing more than just an order to leave town." With that, he strode out, leaving the hall buzzing with conversation. Mayor Thompson quickly adjourned the meeting, and people began to disperse, many stopping to congratulate Bethany or welcome her properly to the community. Through it all, Dawson remained at her side, his presence a bulwark against the lingering shock and emotion of the day. When the last well-wishers had departed, he walked her back to her cottage in the golden light of late afternoon. "Thank you," she said simply as they reached her door, "for believing in me, for standing up for me. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he replied, his smile gentle. "I did what anyone would do for—" He hesitated, then finished, "for a friend." But the way he looked at her suggested he might be thinking of more than friendship, and Bethany found herself hoping that was true. "Would you like to come in for tea?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'd like that very much," he answered, his eyes warm with promise. As the summer passed into autumn, Bethany settled into her role as Salada's schoolteacher. The controversy surrounding her arrival gradually faded as the townsfolk saw her dedication to her pupils and her involvement in community affairs. She organized a harvest festival, started a ladies' reading circle, and even gave piano lessons to several children after school hours. Sheriff Hargrove maintained his suspicious attitude, but with public opinion firmly on Bethany's side, he limited himself to watching her from a distance, waiting for a mistake that never came. As for Edward Bennett, he made good on his threat to withdraw his investments, but as Dawson had predicted, other businessmen quickly filled the void, attracted by the region's rich natural resources. The loss of Bennett's patronage proved to be no loss at all. Bethany and Dawson's friendship deepened with each passing week. He often rode into town on the pretext of business, only to find himself lingering at the schoolhouse or accompanying Bethany on walks along the river. They discovered shared interests in literature and music. Dawson had been educated back east before returning to take over his father's ranch, and a common vision for what Salada could become as it grew. Their growing attachment did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Holloway observed with motherly approval, while others in town exchanged knowing smiles when they saw the two together. Even Sheriff Hargrove seemed to grudgingly accept the situation, though he never quite warmed to Bethany. On a crisp October afternoon, as the aspen trees blazed gold against the deep blue Colorado sky, Dawson invited Bethany for a ride to see his ranch. Propriety was satisfied by the presence of his foreman's wife, who served as chaperone, and then tactfully disappeared to help in the kitchen once they arrived. The Caldwell Ranch was impressive, a sprawling main house built of local stone and timber, several barns and outbuildings, corrals filled with fine horses, and pastures dotted with fat cattle. From the wide porch, the view stretched for miles across the valley to the mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," Bethany said as they stood side by side looking out over Dawson's domain. "Your father built all this, started it. I've added to it over the years." There was quiet pride in his voice. "It's a good life, Bethany, hard sometimes, but good." "It suits you," she observed, studying his profile against the backdrop of his land. You belong here in a way I've never belonged anywhere. You could belong here too, he said softly, turning to face her. If you wanted to. Her heart skipped a beat at the implication in his words. Dawson, I'm not asking yet, he clarified quickly. It's too soon, I know that. You've only just established yourself in Salida and after everything that happened with Bennett. He took her hands in his. But I want you to know that what I feel for you isn't just friendship. It's something more, something I haven't felt for any woman before. Bethany looked down at their joined hands, her emotions in turmoil. She cared deeply for Dawson more than cared if she was honest with herself. But the memory of Charles Bennett's deception still haunted her, making her wary of trusting her heart again. I care for you too, she admitted. But I'm afraid, Dawson, afraid of making the same mistake of trusting too quickly. I understand, he said, and she could see in his eyes that he truly did. I'm not Charles Bennett. I won't rush you or pressure you. All I ask is that you give what's between us a chance to grow in its own time. I'd like that, she whispered, and was rewarded with a smile that made her heart turn over in her chest. They might have kissed then indeed. Bethany found herself hoping they would, but the moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Dawson's foreman rode up to the porch, his expression urgent. Boss, we've got trouble. Rustlers hit the north pasture last night, took at least 30 head. Dawson's expression hardened. Was anyone hurt? Jim Taylor was on night watch. They bushwhacked him, left him tied to a tree. He's pretty banged up, but he'll live. Gather the men, Dawson ordered, immediately shifting into the role of rancher. We'll head out within the hour. The foreman nodded and rode off. Dawson turned back to Bethany, apology in his eyes. I'm sorry, I have to go. Of course, she said, understanding perfectly. Will you be in danger? Cattle rustling is serious business, he admitted. But we'll be careful. I'll have you taken back to town right away. Please be safe, Bethany said, impulsively reaching up to touch his cheek. Come back to me. The words were out before she could consider their implication, but she didn't regret them. Dawson caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Count on it. 3 days passed with no word from Dawson or his men. Bethany tried to focus on her teaching duties, but worry gnawed at her constantly. Cattle rustlers were often desperate men, willing to kill to protect their ill-gotten gains. The thought of Dawson facing such danger was almost unbearable. On the evening of the 3rd day, she was grading arithmetic papers in her cottage when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Sheriff Hargrove standing on her porch, his expression grimmer than usual. Her heart plummeted. Is it Dawson? Is he Caldwell's alive? Hargrove said quickly, apparently reading the fear in her face. But he's been shot. Doc Watson's with him now at his ranch. Shot. Bethany felt the blood drain from her face. How badly? Bad enough. They caught up with the rustlers near the territorial border. There was a gunfight. 2 of the rustlers are dead, one's in my jail. Caldwell took a bullet in the side. I have to go to him, Bethany said immediately, reaching for her shawl. Hargrove blocked her way. It's nearly dark and the ranch is 3 miles out of town. Not proper for a single woman to go rushing out there at this hour. Proper, Bethany repeated incredulously. A man who defended me, who stood up for me when you were trying to run me out of town, is lying wounded, possibly dying, and you're concerned with propriety. Something in her words seemed to reach him. Hargrove studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Get your coat. I'll drive you out there myself. The journey to the ranch in Hargrove's buggy was tense and silent. Bethany clutched her coat around her against the autumn chill, her mind racing with fears for Dawson. The sheriff kept his eyes on the road, his profile rigid in the gathering darkness. Finally, as the lights of the ranch appeared ahead, Hargrove spoke. He did a foolish thing going after those rustlers with just his own men. Should have waited for me and my deputies. Would you have gone with him if he'd asked? Hargrove hesitated, then admitted, probably not. Not for him. Why? What is it about Dawson that you dislike so much? The sheriff was silent for so long that Bethany thought he wouldn't answer. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "He reminds me of myself when I was younger, too sure of himself, too willing to take risks, too ready to believe the best of people. And that's a bad thing." Bethany asked, genuinely curious. "It can get a man killed, or worse." There was something in his voice, a deep, old pain that surprised her. "I learned that lesson the hard way. Seems Caldwell might be learning it now, too." Before Bethany could ask what he meant, they arrived at the ranch. The main house was lit up, with several horses tied outside and men moving about with lanterns. Hargrove helped her down from the buggy, and together they hurried inside. Dr. Watson, an elderly man with gentle hands and keen eyes, met them in the entrance hall. "Sheriff, Miss Wilson. I've just finished with him." "How is he?" Bethany asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bullet went clean through his side. Missed any vital organs, thank the Lord. He's lost a fair amount of blood, and there's always the risk of infection, but if we can keep that at bay, he should recover." Relief made Bethany's knees weak. "Can I see him?" Dr. Watson glanced at the sheriff, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "He's upstairs, first door on the right. He's been asking for you, but he's very weak. Don't stay too long." Dawson lay in a large four-poster bed, his face pale against the white pillows. Bandages wrapped his torso, visible above the sheet that covered him to the waist. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Bethany approached quietly, afraid of disturbing him, but his eyes opened at the sound of her footsteps. A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came." She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, taking his hand in hers. It felt too cool, lacking its usual strength. "What were you thinking, going after armed rustlers? Had to protect what's mine." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Worth it, to see you here." "Don't talk like that," she admonished, tears threatening. "As if you might not have come back at all. Everyone. Risks. Even you. Coming to Salida." He was right, of course. She had taken an enormous risk in starting over, in facing down her past, in opening her heart to him. And yet, sitting here now, holding his hand, she couldn't imagine having made any other choice. "Rest now," she told him. "Save your strength. I'll be here when you wake up." His eyes drifted closed, but a faint smile remained on his lips. Bethany sat with him until his breathing deepened into sleep, then reluctantly made her way back downstairs. Sheriff Hargrove was waiting in the main room, talking quietly with Dr. Watson. Both men looked up as she entered. "He's sleeping," she informed them. "I'd like to stay if that's possible." Dr. Watson nodded. "Mrs. Larson, the foreman's wife, is here. With her as chaperone, it would be perfectly appropriate for you to remain overnight. Caldwell will need careful watching for the next day or two." "I'll get word to the school board that you'll need a substitute," Hargrove offered, surprising Bethany with his helpfulness. "And I'll ride out tomorrow to check on things." After they left, Mrs. Larson showed Bethany to a guest room adjacent to Dawson's. But Bethany spent most of the night in a chair by his bedside, dozing fitfully, waking at each sound to check his condition. His fever rose around midnight, and she bathed his face and chest with cool water, murmuring reassurances as he drifted in and out of consciousness. By morning, the fever had broken, and Dawson was lucid enough to tease her about her disheveled appearance. "If I'd known, getting shot was what it would take to get you, to spend the night, I'd have done it sooner." "Don't joke about such things," she scolded, but she couldn't help smiling at his improved condition, Over the next few days, Bethany divided her time between the schoolhouse and the ranch. The school board, understanding the special circumstances, arranged for her to teach in the mornings while a former teacher handled afternoon sessions. Each day, she rode to the ranch immediately after her morning classes, staying until late evening when Sheriff Hargrove or one of his deputies would escort her back to town. To her surprise, Hargrove became almost friendly during these rides, sharing stories of Salada's early days and occasionally offering grudging comments about Dawson's recovery. It was as though the crisis had shifted something in their relationship, moving them from adversaries to cautious allies. As for Dawson, he gained strength rapidly, his natural vitality reasserting itself. By the end of the week, he was sitting up in bed, complaining about being confined to the house when there was work to be done. "The ranch won't fall apart without you for a few more days," Bethany told him firmly as she changed his bandages. Dr. Watson had shown her how, and she had taken over the task with a gentle competence that seemed to please Dawson immensely. "It's not just the ranch," he admitted, wincing slightly as she applied fresh dressing to his wound. "I miss seeing you in town, walking you home from school, listening to you play the piano at church socials." "I'm right here," she pointed out, her cheeks warming at his words. "It's not the same. I want to court you properly, Bethany. Take you to dinner at the hotel, escort you to the harvest dance, go for rides in the mountains to show you all my favorite places." "There will be time for all of that," she assured him, smoothing the last strip of bandage into place. "Once you're fully recovered." He caught her hand as she withdrew it. "Stay with me a while longer." How could she refuse such a request? Bethany settled into the chair beside his bed, and they talked for hours about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they harbored for the future. Somewhere in that conversation, without explicitly stating it, they both acknowledged that their futures were now irrevocably entwined. By mid-November, Dawson was well enough to return to town. His first public appearance was at church on Sunday, where he received a hero's welcome from the congregation. The rustlers he had captured had been part of a gang terrorizing ranchers across 3 territories, and their apprehension was considered a significant achievement. Even Sheriff Hargrove seemed to have revised his opinion of Dawson. "Good work, Caldwell," he said gruffly after the service. "Those men needed stopping." "High praise coming from you, Sheriff," Dawson replied with a grin. Hargrove almost smiled in return. "Don't get used to it." As the weather turned colder, Bethany found herself spending more and more time in Dawson's company. They established a routine. He would escort her home from school most afternoons, joining her for tea in her cottage, with the door firmly open to avoid gossip. And on weekends they would ride out to the ranch or explore the valley together, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Larson or another respectable matron. Their growing attachment became the talk of the town, but this time the gossip was benevolent, even approving. Mrs. Holloway confided to Bethany that wedding betting pools had already been established at the saloon, with dates ranging from Christmas to Easter. "They don't understand that some things can't be rushed," Bethany told her, though in truth, she found herself thinking more and more about what it would be like to be Dawson's wife. The Christmas season brought a festive atmosphere to Salada. The schoolhouse and church were decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and preparations for the annual Christmas social occupied much of Bethany's time. Her pupils were practicing carols and recitations, and she herself was planning to perform several piano pieces at the event. On the evening of December 23rd, as she was putting the finishing touches on the decorations in the schoolhouse, Dawson arrived unexpectedly, stamping snow from his boots. "You're early," she said, smiling at the sight of him. The social wasn't scheduled to begin for another hour. "I wanted to see you alone first," he explained, crossing the room to where she stood beside the small Christmas tree. "I have something for you, an early Christmas gift." From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in silver paper. Bethany accepted it with a curious look. "Should I open it now?" "Please," he said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small velvet box. Her heart began to pound as she opened it to find a delicate gold band set with a single perfect diamond flanked by two smaller sapphires. "It was my mother's," Dawson said softly. "My father gave it to her the day he asked her to marry him, right here in Salida, 30 years ago." Bethany looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Dawson." He took her hands in his, the ring box cradled between them. "I know it hasn't been very long, and I promised I wouldn't rush you. But these past months have shown me what kind of woman you are, Bethany, brave and kind and stronger than you know. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood up to Hargrove without backing down an inch." A laugh escaped her at the memory, though tears were now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I want to build a life with you," Dawson continued, his voice husky with emotion. "Here in Salida at the ranch, wherever you want to be. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to raise a family with you, grow old with you." He took a deep breath. "Bethany Wilson, will you marry me?" For a moment, Bethany couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. All the doubts and fears that had plagued her since Boston, all the protective walls she had built around her heart, seemed to dissolve in the face of Dawson's love. This wasn't like Charles Bennett's smooth deceptions. This was real as the man standing before her, his eyes filled with hope and vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Yes, Dawson Caldwell, I will marry you." His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "When?" he asked, unable to contain his happiness. "Spring, summer, New Year's Day," she replied without hesitation. "I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." His answering smile was everything she could have hoped for. He leaned down to kiss her, a gentle brush of his lips against hers that quickly deepened into something more profound. Bethany had been kissed before, by Charles Bennett and by a few beaux in her younger days, but never like this, never with this sense of rightness, of coming home. When they finally parted, both breathless and a little dazed, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably do that again," he murmured, "just to make sure it was as wonderful as I thought." Bethany laughed and lifted her face for another kiss, but they were interrupted by the sound of the schoolhouse door opening. They sprang apart guiltily, though their clasped hands and Bethany's tear-streaked, radiant face told their own story. Sheriff Hargrove stood in the doorway, eyebrows raised at the scene before him. "I see congratulations are in order," he observed dryly. "They are," Dawson confirmed, pulling Bethany closer to his side. "Miss Wilson has just agreed to become Mrs. Caldwell on New Year's Day." Hargrove's stern expression softened marginally. "Well, that's good news, I suppose, though it means we'll be needing a new school teacher." "Not necessarily," Bethany said. "Many communities allow married women to teach." "We'll have to put it to the school board," Hargrove replied, but his tone suggested he wouldn't oppose the idea. "Now, I believe you two have a Christmas social to attend. Half the town is already gathering outside." As they prepared to leave, Hargrove stopped Dawson with a hand on his arm. "Take good care of her, Caldwell," he said quietly. "She's had enough hardship." "I intend to," Dawson promised with equal seriousness. The Christmas social was a grand success, though many of the attendees were more interested in congratulating the newly engaged couple than in listening to the children's recitations or Bethany's piano performance. News of the engagement spread quickly, and by the time they began serving refreshments, it seemed everyone in Salida had heard. Mrs. Holloway bustled over to examine the ring, declaring it perfectly lovely, while Mr. Abernathy shook Dawson's hand vigorously and assured him he was getting the finest teacher west of the Mississippi. Even the children were excited, though some of the younger pupils were concerned about what would happen to their beloved Miss Wilson. "Will you still be our teacher when you're married?" 7-year-old Lucy Peterson asked anxiously. "I hope so," Bethany replied, glancing at the members of the school board who stood nearby. "If the board agrees." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "I think I can speak for my colleagues when I say we'd be fools to lose you, Miss Wilson, or rather, Mrs. Caldwell-to-be. As long as you're willing to continue, the position is yours." A cheer went up from the children, and Bethany felt tears threatening again. This was what she had dreamed of: acceptance, purpose, a place to belong. And now, with Dawson by her side, she would have love as well. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The wedding would be held in the church, with Reverend Simmons officiating. Mrs. Holloway took charge of organizing the reception, which would be held at the town hall. Bethany worked on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Peterson, who had once been a seamstress in Denver, helped her design and sew. Dawson, meanwhile, was busy with his own preparations. The main house at the ranch was being thoroughly cleaned and updated for its new mistress, and he made several mysterious trips to Denver, returning with packages he refused to let Bethany see. "Wedding presents," he would say with a maddening grin. "You'll find out on New Year's Day." The morning of January 1, 1879, dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing Salida in pristine white. Bethany stood at the window of Mrs. Holloway's best guest room, where she had spent the night according to tradition, watching as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "Nervous?" Mrs. Holloway asked as she entered with a breakfast tray. "Not about marrying Dawson," Bethany replied honestly. "Only about standing in front of the whole town." "They're all on your side now, dear," Mrs. Holloway reminded her, setting down the tray. "Even Sheriff Hargrove in his own way." It was true. In the days leading up to the wedding, Hargrove had made a point of stopping by the schoolhouse to awkwardly wish Bethany well. He had even offered to escort her down the aisle, since she had no father or brother to perform the duty. "Doesn't have to be me," he'd added gruffly when she hesitated. But a bride should have someone to give her away. Touched by the gesture, Bethany had accepted, seeing it as the final healing of the rift between them. Now, as she prepared for her wedding day, she found herself thinking about how far she had come since that first dusty afternoon in Salida. The frightened, disgraced young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach seemed like a different person entirely from the confident, beloved bride she had become. At precisely 2 o'clock, the church bell began to ring, signaling the start of the ceremony. Bethany, resplendent in her ivory silk gown with sprigs of holly in her upswept auburn hair, stood in the church vestibule with Sheriff Hargrove. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," she confirmed, placing her hand on his sleeve. The church doors opened, and Bethany caught her first glimpse of the interior, transformed for the occasion with evergreen garlands and white ribbons. Every pew was filled. The townsfolk of Salida turned out in their finest clothes for the most anticipated wedding in recent memory. And there at the altar, waiting for her, stood Dawson Caldwell, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on her with such love that Bethany felt her heart might burst with happiness. Sheriff Hargrove led her slowly down the aisle as Mrs. Abernathy played the wedding march on the church organ. When they reached the altar, he placed Bethany's hand in Dawson's with a solemn nod that somehow conveyed both blessing and warning. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Bethany was aware of Reverend Simmons's sonorous voice, of the familiar words of the marriage service, but most of all, she was aware of Dawson, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the depth of feeling in his eyes as he repeated his vows, the gentle way he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Simmons declared at last. "Mr. Caldwell, you may kiss your bride." Dawson needed no further invitation. He drew Bethany into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and applause from the congregation. The reception at the town hall lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, toasts and laughter, and through it all, Bethany remained close to Dawson's side, scarcely able to believe that this wonderful man was now her husband. As the celebration began to wind down, Dawson leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Caldwell." Home. Such a simple word, and yet it meant everything: security, belonging, love. Bethany nodded, suddenly eager to begin their life together. They slipped away amid cheers and well wishes, climbing into the sleigh that would carry them to the ranch. As they drove through the moonlit night, Dawson tucked the buffalo robe more securely around Bethany and drew her close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "And you? I have everything I could ever want right here." His arm tightened around her. "When I think about how close we came to losing this, if the sheriff had succeeded in sending you away, if I hadn't spoken up." "But you did," Bethany reminded him. "You said she stays or I go too, and that changed everything." "Best thing I ever said," Dawson agreed, smiling down at her. "Though I love you and I do are close seconds." As the sleigh crested a hill, the Caldwell Ranch came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light against the snowy landscape. Home, Bethany thought again, her heart full. Not just a place, but a person. Dawson was her home now, and she was his. And together, they would build a life filled with all the love and joy that had once seemed beyond her reach. The sheriff had said she had to leave by sundown, but the cowboy had said she stays, or he goes too. And in the end, she had stayed, and found everything she had ever wanted in the process.
Allergies going a little haywire tonight, and that's okay. No, but I agree. I think it's more um I think there's something to be said for like different signs. Like for example, fire signs getting along pretty well. But I don't put all my like I don't say that that's like tried and true for every case, you know? Cuz I've got to say like depends on the power dynamics too, you know? It depends on like the relationship. If it's friends based, certainly I think those signs can get along. If it's like parents or grandparents, yes, they definitely can get along, but there's going to be stubbornness, you know, and clashing of heads, in my opinion, particularly when it comes to having a Leo grandmother and Sagittarius grandfather. Hi. Hi, baby. What is it? No, you can't go this way. I'm sorry. Oh, no. Hi, baby. Hi. Yes, you're so pretty. Love our channel because it's nice and chill, not too much going on. Oh, thank you.